Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me along here. It's always nice to discover a new tech group in your local area.
Could have probably helpful too because you mentioned some library.
I would say that I was pretty impressed by how detailed and demanding your questions were. Be careful if I only say things. But you know, if you disagree with me, then I'd like to hear about it at the end. So my name's Steve, and I'm a web developer. I've been doing web development pretty much the whole time of my career. And at the moment I work for Microsoft, and I work on building a large single-page application for them. And I also started this Knockout.JS project about 4 years ago, something like that. So that's obviously something that's of some interest to me, and I hope it'll be of interest to you. Out of interest, how many of you have ever seen anything related to Knockout before? Okay, pretty cool. Wow, good group of you. Okay, that's great. So I'm not going to be doing much in the way of like intro to that stuff. I'm mainly going to be talking about some new stuff that's coming along in the next version, which is coming out soon, and specifically how that can be of use to people who are building really large and demanding single-page applications, which is something a lot of people are doing these days. So before I start, a little warning. Sometimes people say that my presentation style feels a little bit like this to the audience, and I would say it's probably fair. It probably will be a bit like that, but don't worry, you're already used to it because Sam's talk was already quite a lot like that. And also, I should point out, I'm not expecting you to understand every single thing that I put up on the screen. Now, there's going to be a lot of code kind of whizzing past you, faster than you can even read it probably. The point is not for you to read and understand every single line, it's just to try and get a conceptual understanding of what sort of things I'm doing, and whether it's something that you would want to do as well yourself, even if you don't remember or understand every line of the API. Okay, right. So to give you a little bit of background about the sort of problems that I'm interested in working on, I would like to show you a little video, but it's not playing. So I'm going to, this is a problem with the discrete graphics card and PowerPoint, but let's not think about that. Let me just play the video here instead. Okay, so this is what I work on at the moment. Any of you seen this before, this website? Yeah, a handful. Okay, so this is the management portal for Microsoft Azure, which is our cloud platform thing. And this is where you come along to if you want to set up websites and databases and all this kind of stuff. And I work on the team that's building the architecture for this. It's a massive single-page application. We've got many developers. We've got tens of different teams feeding code into this system, so it's a very big project. And there's a lot going on at runtime as well. It's pulling in data from dozens of back-end services to try and present all this information about what's going on in the cloud. And it's got some pretty advanced UI features as well. For example, basically everything that you can see is customizable. The user can move all these parts around. They can, for example, pin that little graph down onto their startboard there. Maybe they decide that they want to also pin that graph of HTTP requests onto their startboard. They can do that. They can generally customize everything that's there. And the team I work on is responsible for designing the architecture for this and for making sure that many different teams can feed code into it in a way that scales, and that we can deliver code and data to browsers in a way that's efficient as well. So we need to, we've had to think really hard about this, and that's the sort of single-page application problem I'm interested in. So, back onto what we are going to cover in this talk. I'm going to be talking quite a lot about Knockout. Now, most of you have said you've heard of this thing before, so I won't go on too much with the intro. It's a model view library for JavaScript. It's not the only one. There are many others that are out there. But this is the one that we use to build the Azure Management Portal. It's what drives all the UI that you've seen there. So, what are some of the major benefits of this that led us to choose it? Or you may think I chose it because I'm biased, but I didn't. It wasn't me who chose it. It was the team chose it before I joined that team. I joined it because they chose it, and that was cool for me. So why did they choose to use this to build that big project? Well, one of the major advantages is that Knockout is very deliberately a library. It's not a big, massive framework that tries to tell you where to keep all your files and how to organize all the different pieces of your application. So unlike some of the other model view systems for JavaScript, it's deliberately designed to interact with many other small libraries, giving you a lot of power and control. Another cool thing that's really valuable for us at least is that Knockout is designed to have a very clear understanding of your data models. So in a similar way to as Sam was talking, it allows you to set up reactive flows of changes throughout your application. So as something changes in one view model, that might affect the data that's been output somewhere else, which feeds into another view model, which feeds into something else, and eventually lands in the UI. And by understanding this flow of data, we can scale up to deal with tens of thousands of bits of data being on the screen at any one time. And we don't have to worry that it's going to be impractical to recompute it all, because it doesn't all get recomputed. Knockout knows what bits of data affect which other bits of data, and that allows us to scale dramatically. Another good thing is, Knockout is not the best known model view library for JavaScript. You'll have heard of other things like Backbone and Angular and such that are better known. But Knockout is well known enough that it's not really a problem for us to get third-party libraries and support and such like. Also, Knockout is very keen on backward compatibility. I'll show you a kind of ridiculous extreme example of that later on, but suffice to say, it takes very seriously compatibility with its own previous versions and with older browsers, which is important to us. But one thing about it that people have often said is not so great is that it does not give you some sort of ready-made architecture in a box. And of course it doesn't, because it's a library, not a framework, right? But in some cases that can be a drawback, because maybe you want loads of guidance about how to structure your application. So something I'll show you today maybe mitigates that to some extent a little bit. So I'm going to start by giving you a little demo of this new feature, the biggest new feature that's coming into the next version of Knockout, which is really valuable if you're building a large single-page application. It's a feature called Components. So let me do a little bit of demo. How's the font size there? Can you read that up at the back? Okay, all right. So this here is the most boring, tedious 101 sort of hello world knockout thing you can imagine. I've got a very, very trivial view model here, and I've got a single property on it with some value, and I'm saying it's observable, and that makes it into effectively a stream of data, so it allows us to do this kind of reactive style programming over that. And then I'm binding an instance of this view model to my view, and this is my view, the single line of markup up here. I'm just saying I want a text box, and the value on it is the name. Okay, very, very simple. Let me just run that in my browser. Okay, so you can see it pops up, it displays the message in the text box, and I can edit that, and it's edited my underlying data model there. But you can't see anything interesting happening there. So let me just add a bit of functionality into this before I actually turn this into a reusable component. So firstly, let's produce some interesting output. Well, call it interesting, it's subjective, but let's say I want to display an uppercase version of this value as well. So let me just drop in a little bit of code that you don't want to watch me type out. So I'm going to declare an extra property on my view model called uppercase name, and it's a computed property. And that means that Knockout will watch all of the things that it depends on and react as they change. So in this case, we're watching for new values coming out of name, and when they do come out, we're going to call to uppercase to get an uppercase value, and then we're going to, and that's going to become the new value for uppercase name. Okay. So let's say I want to actually drop a view of that into my view. So let's put this here. So here's my trivial bit of view. I've got a strong element here, and I'm binding the text, that property of it, to this uppercase name thing here. So now, if I come back and reload, then as I edit stuff in here, then the uppercase version of it changes down there, and it will keep on changing. And this is the basics of how Knockout understands the relationships between data, because I can set up an arbitrarily long chain here with properties computed from other properties, and such like, and those changes will flow out through that dependency graph in exactly the way that you expect, and you don't have to declare that anyway.
What question? Sorry, I can't see how you're associating the view model with the format. Just by the word name.
In this case, the name here, that bit of string there, that name, is because we're bounding to an instance of this view model. It'll look for a property called name. Just like here, I've got uppercase name. It'll look for a property called uppercase name. Does that make sense?
What if you had two form elements? So you have to have unique...
No, not at all. Let's say if I want to have a few copies of this, let's go wild, then they're all going to update because they're all bound to the same.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay, great. So we've got ourselves a trivial little thing that does not a lot of interesting stuff, but let's say that we want to make this into a reusable component now, because it's impractical to just have one top-level view model. Nobody can build a large application that way. So what we can now do with this new feature, I'm going to say ko.components.register, and then I'm going to give a name to my new component, and I'll call it person editor. That's just an arbitrary string. And then for each component, I would declare a template and a view model. Okay, and you can declare these in various ways. I can declare them to be loaded from external files, or I can declare them to be pulled their values out of DOM elements or anything like that. Now, since this is a sort of hello world demo, what I'm going to do to make this easy for us is I'm going to just copy and paste the existing template that I've got directly into the declaration like that. You wouldn't do that in a realistic application because it would be really unpleasant to try and maintain that. You would pull it in from an external file, and I'll show you that later. Okay, and then for my view model, again, I'm just going to grab this thing that I've already got and make that the view model for here. Just lay that out a little better. Okay, so we've got a component with a template and a view model, and now I don't need any top-level view model anymore, so let's get rid of that. Okay, and if I now actually run this in my browser, everything goes to blank. Why has it gone blank? Well, because I haven't got any view anymore, that's the main reason. So let's say I want to use an instance of this person editor. There's a few ways I can do it, but the most interesting and fun way is I can use a custom element, person editor, like that. Okay? So now back in my browser, I've got my person editor. And in fact, just like I did before, I can have multiple ones of these if I want to. But this time they're all independent. They're all separate components now. So that's just the very beginnings of what I can do. And you'll see this sort of resembles the proposed web components spec. So this allows me to do some of the cool stuff that you can do with web components, but with browsers today in a way that's very backward compatible. And this is just the start. I can also do interesting things like nest components, one inside another. I can subclass them, I can pass data into them, I can get data out of them, I can make them preloaded, I can make them loaded on demand. I can do loads of cool stuff, and I'll be showing you some of that as we go along. So that's your sort of very basics. But this is not very realistic application architecture just yet, is it? Look at my application file system here. I've got one index HTML file. I don't think you're going to build a very large application that way. So what would be a realistic structure for an application? Well, that's a very broad question, isn't it? There are many different ways you can do it. And also, you've probably got to think about lots of different dependencies you'll want. You probably want a testing system, you probably want some kind of build system, you probably want some kind of module loading system, you'll probably want Bootstrap or something like that. You're going to need loads of extra components, and it's going to take you ages to figure out what you want and how you're going to organize it, probably. So wouldn't it be nice if there was some sort of ready-made system that you could just use? Well, that brings me onto Yeoman. How many of you used Yeoman? Pretty small, okay, like 20%. Okay, for those of you who haven't, Yeoman is a bit of front-end tooling which allows you to generate starting points for your application, or scaffold them if you prefer that terminology. So it's like a scaffolding system. And like most front-end tooling, it's built on Node.js, and of course it's all open source, GitHub, blah, blah. And this allows you to create a starting point for your application on many different kinds of technologies, whether it's Ember, Backbone, Angular, blah, blah, blah. And of course there are generators available for Knockout. And so I'm going to show you one of these, one that I've set up actually. So let's use Yeoman to generate for ourselves an application starting point. But we need to figure out what is this application we're going to build. And you can see from this little clue, handily, that this is going to be a website for a fake TV company. So let's imagine that you've brought in to work for a TV company, and they want a website that will read the raw data about what programs are showing on TV and produce a nice performance website to let users see what's currently showing on TV. So let's say we've already got a nice little back-end service, and I've already created a back-end service that produces JSON data, and I've built it with Node, but it doesn't really matter what it's built with. It could have been built with ASP.NET Web API or Rails or assembly or whatever you like. As long as it produces JSON data, we're good with that. So let me just start up my back-end here. So let's go with Node back-end app. Okay, so that's now running, and I'll just show you what sort of data this produces here. So that's just going to produce some raw JSON data, and I'm going to be grabbing that in my front end. Okay, but I don't have a front end yet at all. So let's start by creating one. Let's make a new directory, front end. Okay, let's go into there. And I want to use Yeoman to scaffold out the application starting point. So when you've installed Yeoman through Node, you call it by saying Yo. Yo is the command for Yeoman. And then you need to pass to that what the name of the generator you want it to use. So it could be Backbone or jQuery or whatever. I want to use Knockout, so it's Yo, and let's let that do its thing. And then it starts off with this really sort of cringeworthy ASCII art thing, which don't blame me for, that's just, what Yeoman does. So it's going to ask us a few questions. What's the name of your new site? Okay, let's call it TV Guide. Do you want to use JavaScript or TypeScript? Well, that's a very interesting thing, isn't it? I don't have time to talk about TypeScript, so we're going to go with JavaScript now. Do you want some automated tests with Jasmine and Karma? Yeah, why not? It would seem rather rude to say no, wouldn't it? So let's let it do its thing. It's now creating some files for us, and it's also setting up a build and test system based on Gulp and Karma. And I don't think I'll have time to talk about Karma much, but I will show you a bit of Gulp. And that's why it's pulling all these node modules now. That's what all these node modules are for. And it's set all this stuff up for me. So if we look at what we've got in there now, you see we've got some files. It's a little hard to make sense of it in terminal like that. So let's see what we've got up here. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll be able to see. Zoom in. All right, so you can see that we've got node modules. That's where all this build and test dependencies are. And we've got various config files to do with making that stuff go. Then we've also got a test folder. You can guess what's in there. And we've got a source folder, which is the interesting bit for us. Some of that's kind of obvious, like we've got CSS and HTML. You know what that stuff is. Bower modules. How many of you use Bower? Oh, it's a decent number. It's like more than a third, maybe nearly half. Okay. Bower is a package manager for JavaScript. So this has been used to set up, to install dependencies like jQuery, Knockout, Require.js, and so on. So they're all in there. And then the bits that are custom to our application are this stuff in app and in components. So in app, we've got various files to do with starting the application up. And this is all just a suggested architecture, remember. There's nothing in Knockout that assumes you're actually writing your code in this way. It's just a suggestion that comes out of this generator. And then we've got some components, which are built in the way that I showed you that first at the time. About page, home page, and navbar. So they're called pages, but this is still actually a single page application. There's no actual navigation that's going to take place. So let me run this now so we can actually see it running. To run it, all we have to do is point any web server in the world to this source folder here. You could use Apache, Nginx, IIS, whatever you like, because it's all just static files. And I'm going to, for convenience, use this HTTP server command line tool, which is a node module. And I'm going to say, serve up the contents of my source folder, please. So that's now serving locally on port 8080. Let's see what we've got, shall we? So let's go to that and get this stuff out of the way. Okay. All right. So you can see we've got a very simple kind of bootstrappy UI. Let's make this readable. Okay. Right. So it's bootstrap. You've all seen this kind of stuff before. We've got navigation, but it's a single page app, so we're not really doing any actual navigation. This is hash-based addressing. And we've got this only one trivial bit of functionality, which is you click a button and some text changes, just to show you the sort of basics of actually reacting to something. If you want to see a bit of code, well, there's not much to it. In the About page, all we've got is a single HTML file. So that shows you that the simplest component is nothing more than an HTML file. So you can do something as easy as that. And a slightly more interesting one would be the home page. So that contains both a template and a view model. The template displays a message and has this button you can click. And then the view model has got the message property and the function that changes it when you click something. Does that seem reasonable? Yeah? Great. All right, so let's add some actual functionality to our application now. Remember, we want to pull some data from the back end and render it as a nice little grid. So I want to make a new component that's going to go on the home page to display this grid of TV programs. And I'm going to call it Program Grid. So if I want to create that, I could manually start adding some files and folders in here if I wanted to. But more conveniently still, I can use Yeoman again. And I can say, Yeoman, please generate for me a Knockout component and call it Program Grid, if you would be so kind. And that will produce the files for a Program Grid component. So now if I go back into my text editor, you'll see that we've got our Program Grid over here on the left. And it's got a simple view, which just displays like a hello world type message, and a very simple view model, which has got a constructor, which sets up a message. And it also shows you that you can have a disperse function when things get torn down, but I don't actually need that, so I'll delete it. And it registers itself with A and B so that it can be dynamically loaded as needed as we use a navigator around. So that's our simple component. Let's actually use it now. So I want to put an instance of this on my home page template. So let's get rid of this junk that we've already got, and I'll change the title to What's on TV. Well, how do we use the program grid? Very easily, program grid. Very nice, loosely coupled association there between my two different components. And then if I come back to my browser and reload, you'll see the program grid has now been injected under this message onto the home page there. Pretty straightforward. But let's make it actually fetch the data and render it now. So I'm going to go to my program grid view model, and I'll get rid of this junk message that shows up by default, and I'm going to add some data, some real data that's going to come from the backend service now. So here it is. what I'm going to do is declare a property called channels, and that's going to be an array of all the channels that subscribers can currently receive. And it's an array, but moreover, it's an observable array, which means that it's a stream of array values. And as they change, the UI is automatically going to react to that. So you could do something like connect a WebSocket, input to that, and as new data comes from the server, that array data is going to change and the UI is going to get updated. But I just want to populate it once in this demo, so all I'm going to do is the simplest thing possible, a single AJAX request to this particular backend, and it's just going to drop all the results into this .channels. Alright, so that should get populated. And now I want to actually render this channel stuff in my view. So I'll switch over to the view, and I'll delete the junk that was put there, and I'm going to drop in some markup that I've already prepared. So you might not have time to read all that, but basically I've got an HTML table with some class on it, and then in the body I'm saying iterate over all of the values on the current channels array, and for each one create a table row. And then in the first column we'll have an image, and that will display the logo of the TV channel. And then in the second column we'll iterate over all the programs that are showing on that channel. And then inside there we're going to, for each program, have a div with a class, and we'll display the title, start time, and end time, and we'll set up the width of it so that the grid all nicely lines up in the way that we'll see in a minute. Okay. So let's see if it works, shall we? I'll come over and I'll hit reload, and hopefully it does actually fetch the data from the backend server, but the layout is sort of disgusting at the moment. And the reason the layout is so hideous is because I haven't actually created any CSS for it yet. So I'm going to put some CSS in to make it render nicely. And this talk is not about CSS. If it was, I'd probably be talking about less and Sass and featuring them in your build system and all this kind of stuff. But this talk has got nothing to do with that, so I'm just going to drop in a big chunk of CSS that I've already written, and you can just trust that that's not very hard to do. So now I've got my CSS. We'll see it now actually does, in fact, render a nice little grid of all the programs that are currently showing. So that's cool. And we've got a reusable component. We can use more of them. But what about if we wanted to do something a bit different? Let's say instead of displaying all the TV channels, we just want to filter it down to the ones that the user is currently subscribed to. Maybe we want to pass a parameter into our program grid component to tell it whether to filter by subscription or not. So let me show you how we can pass parameters into components. I'm going to go to my homepage view here, where the program grid is getting used, and let's say I want to pass a param into it. Params equals only my channels true. Only the channels that this user is currently paying to see. Okay. Come back to the browser and hit reload, and you see that nothing different is happening whatsoever. Why is nothing different happening? Well, because my program grid has never heard of this parameter, so it's ignoring it completely. Let's put in the logic to actually do something with this. In my programs grid, I want to have an extra property that is a filtered set of channels according to what the user currently pays to receive. So let's drop this in here. So this is a little bit more of your reactive type programming. This filtered channels array is observable, and it starts with looking at the channels array, and each time a value comes out of there, we're going to filter that, filter the contents of that array, so that we only get things that you're subscribed to. So what it does is it says, well, maybe we're applying a filter, maybe we're not. We're going to look for a parameter called only my channels. And if we've got one, and it's true-ish, then we're going to apply a filter. And if we're applying a filter, we're only going to output this channel if you're subscribed to it. Otherwise, we'll output everything. So now, we can display, instead of just the channels, we'll display filtered channels. Okay, let's see if that works. Now, instead of showing all those channels, we're just going to see a few, the ones that this person is subscribed to see, as far as the backend is concerned. And of course, since this is a reusable component, we can use multiple copies of it with different parameters, for example. So I could change this title here to My Programs, and then also, underneath that, I could say all channels, some of which you're missing. How much on? Okay, and then we'll not filter that. And then if I come back into my browser and reload, you'll see we've got my programs at the top, and then we've got all the channels down below. Nice. And of course, we can reuse this component in other places. There's no real coupling from the home component to the program grid, so we've got a very clean system now. Okay, good. So we're doing quite well, but there is a sense in which we're doing kind of badly. Now let me show you what that is. Let's go over into this About page, which is really trivial and does almost nothing. And I'm going to hit reload, and then let's have a look at this network tab. Can you see that I've made 18 separate HTTP requests just to produce this one trivial little page? And the reason we've got so many requests is that everything's being loaded separately. The navbar template, the navbar view model, knockout projections, crossroads, knockout, bootstrap, blah, blah, blah. Every single thing is being loaded separately. And that is brilliant in development because the files that you see in your browser precisely correspond to the files that you see in your IDE or text editor. So it's really easy to understand. But it's not great in production. No, you don't want to do that because that's not going to be efficient at all. So what's the solution? Well, I'm sure most of you know that you're going to want some kind of system of bundling your files together and minifying them. And this is where we get into build systems. Oh, wrong thing. How many of you have used either Grunt or Gulp? A decent number as well, okay? So that's like maybe a third of you, okay? For those of you who haven't, these are command line build systems for front-end type files. So for your JavaScript, CSS, HTML, that kind of thing. So in the case of Grunt, you run it on the command line, and it's going to do a series of tasks that you've configured it to do. So maybe you've configured it to link to your source code, to bundle it, and so on, and produce some output that's then optimal for shipping to production. And Gulp is a similar thing. I'm going to show you Gulp in a minute. So let's have a go at using one of these to produce some optimal output without components. I want some way of bundling all these components. So it would take a little while to set up from scratch, but thankfully, when we used Yeoman just then, it produced for us a Gulp file.js. And that is pre-configured with various tasks that are useful, like how to process HTML, how to optimize JavaScript and minify it and then bundle it and so on. So lots of stuff that's set up for you already there. I'm not going to go through that line by line. The one thing that we're most interested in here is this require.js optimizer. I'll tell you about that in a second, but first let's just run this. So firstly, remember that it took 18 requests to produce this about page, which is pretty rubbish. And also notice that I've got here a source folder in my directory here, but I don't have a dist folder yet. That's what I'm about to create. So if I simply run Gulp in the way it's been configured by default, then that is going to run all these tasks and it's going to spit out some optimized files into a folder called dist. So now it's done that, if I look in my text editor, you'll see I've got dist here. And it's just got a small number of files. One CSS file, one HTML file, one JavaScript file, and some both ones that don't really matter. And now, let's see what that does in a browser. So I'm going to shut down my existing web server that serves source and start a new one serving up dist instead. So now that's running. I'll come back to the browser and I'll hit reload. And this time you'll see it's all working as before, except now, instead of 18 requests, we've made 3. One HTML file, one CSS file, one script file, and we're done. So that is way better for production use. Or is it? We'll get to that in a second. But we're not quite finished yet, because actually, this is going to lead to some broken behavior. Because watch, if I switch over to the home page, you'll see the grids are not appearing. And we're getting these 404 errors. 404, program grid is not found. So what's going on there? Well, what's going on is that it's trying to dynamically load the program grid component, but that program grid component is not in the dist folder. So you're probably thinking, what on earth is that for? Why wasn't it included in the dist folder? Is that some kind of bug? The answer is no, it's not a bug. If it was, I wouldn't tell you about it, obviously. So what that is a very deliberate behavior, where by default, this build system is set up to assume that your components are being dynamically loaded. And if you, because that's probably what you want to do a large percentage of the time. If you want to preload a component, then you have to tell your build system that that's something that you want to do. And I'll look at that in a second. So, well, look at now. So let's say we want to preload this program grid component. All we do is we go over to the require.js optimizer and tell it to include that component. It can't figure it out on its own because components are too loosely coupled. There's no way it knows that that component even exists. Plus, it's likely that you would want to dynamically load it. So if I want to preload it, on my list of includes here, I'm going to include the thing that's in the program grid directory and is in a module called program grid. So that's what I do. And the require.js optimizer looks at the A&D modules and walks the dependency graph to find everything that they depend on to get the full set of everything that you're using, and then it's going to bundle all that into a single output. So that's what this optimizer does. So now if I come back over here and I run Gulp again, then this time it's going to include the program grid module in the output. So now it's done that. If I come back to the browser and reload, this time instead of the errors, we'll see everything's working again. Good. Okay. So we've greatly improved performance in a sense because we've now bundled and preloaded everything. But in another sense, we've completely ruined performance because we bundled and preloaded everything, which is dumb, right? Because you don't want to preload everything. But when the user goes to the home page, there's no reason to think they're going to go to the About page. So why do you want to preload the About page? And this is a bit of a problem we've got with the Azure Management Portal at the moment. We preload absolutely every possible thing, and that is not optimal. So we're working on fixing that at the moment. But with this system that I've got here, it's very easy to control what stuff gets preloaded and what stuff gets dynamically loaded. So let's say I want to dynamically load the About page. I could use a feature that is supported by AMD and works very cleanly with Knockout components called bundles. So let's say I don't want to preload this About page. Let's get rid of that from the includes list, and I'll create myself a new bundle. And I can call it anything I want. So I'll call it About Stuff, and I give an array of the AMD modules that are in there. And I'm just going to put this About page template. So it's kind of trivial in this case because it's just a single HTML file, but it could be a regular AMD module that has dependencies and so on, and it would all work. So now, if I run gulp again, then we'll see when we look at the dist folder, when it finishes, instead of just having scripts.js, we should also have aboutstuff.js, and that contains all the stuff needed to render the About page. It's trivial in this case, but it could contain a lot of stuff. And now, when I reload the home page, everything comes up, but now it hasn't loaded anything about the About page at all. I know you can't verify that, you'll have to trust me, but what you'll see is, when I switch to the About screen, the About page comes up, and it's dynamically loaded this About Stuff bundle. So, the important thing to understand is, in development, you can just work with the files as they are, and don't have to think about bundles at all, so you get a really clean development experience, and you don't have to keep building stuff all the time. And it's only when you go to production and put your DevOps hat on, that you can experiment with different bundling strategies. You don't have to touch your application architecture in any way at all to try out different groups of bundling to see what's going to produce an optimal output in your case. I know it's pretty long time for one. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, good, great. So, coming to the end of this now, we've been doing some cool development in a pretty modern style here. We've been working with Gulp, we've been working with components in a way that somewhat resembles web components. We've been working with Knockout to do a modern review model type programming. We've got some nice reactive stuff going on. It's all very nice and modern. Does that mean we have to throw away support for older browsers? The answer is definitely not. So I'm sure Knockout is not going to support all browsers forever, but right now, Knockout is, one of the key values of Knockout is to have really great backwards compatibility. So I'm going to show you a ridiculously extreme example of that. Now, I seriously hope that you don't have clients who are using Windows 98. That would be tragic for all kinds of reasons. But as a sort of extreme example, I'm going to show you that the code that we've written just there is going to work completely fine. If that boots up, which it's not currently doing, so let's have a go at resetting that. No, it is doing. Okay, good. It's just slow. All right. You know, it was a more leisurely pace back in 1998. Okay. Now, I can't remember my password from 1998, but it's okay, because Microsoft was not very serious about security back then, so I can just cancel my... And now, I'm going to run that TV guide application. So here's the code from before. I'm going to pop that open in my Windows 98 browser, which is not particularly quick to start up, but I do believe it is going to start up eventually. Here we go. And here we go. It's actually running. The same thing as before. I've even added a little bit of extra functionality, so I've got a toggle box that allows you to control dynamically the parameter that gets passed in there. And you can see it's all working. The only thing that doesn't quite work is the Bootstrap CSS. As you can see, Bootstrap is just kind of spewed everywhere, and it's just produced this weird box. And when you click the box, you can see the menu. I don't know why. But anyway, it is actually working. Like, I can do navigation properly. You know, proper client-side navigation, proper dynamic loading, everything's, you know, it's really working. It is. And I didn't have to change anything apart from, because this old browser doesn't support cross-origin requests, I made it fetch the data from localhost instead of, you know, from a real backend server. But you could work around it if you wanted to. But basically, it works. Okay. So I hope you don't really need that, but it's good to know it's there. Right then, we are done. Right then, so in summary, we've looked at how we can use Knockout components to build reusable modules in your application, how we can do things like reference one from another, how we can pass parameters into them, how we can bundle them so that they get preloaded, how we can make them get dynamically loaded. I didn't have time to talk about testing anyway, but if anyone wants to know about that, I can even give you a little demo of using the common test runner with this afterwards. If we have time. Probably manage a few minutes of questions, can we? Yeah? Any questions? Or tell me if you just want to see the car things. I can do that as well. Yeah.
Just wondering, that bundles thing you showed off, is that part of the core required JS? Is that an extension you guys added?
Yes, so what's this bundles thing? In the gulp file here. Alright, so require.js, since version 2.2 or something, which is a few months old, I can't remember the version of that, it has supported bundles at runtime. So it understands the idea of being told about bundles at runtime, and it will know that if it wants to find a module, and that module is declared as being in a certain bundle, it will load the bundle instead of trying to load the module directly. So it understands it at runtime. The thing that require.js does not do yet is build time. So the require.js optimizer natively does nothing with bundles. And I've used a build module that basically produces that. So the build system I've got produces an output, dynamically creates a require.js config that tells it about the bundles that I'm using. So if you use this Yeoman generator, that will already be set up for you. Okay? Yeah, any question? I'm sorry.
Can you use knockout bindings for parameters?
Can I use knockout bindings? So by that do you mean like kind of passing on savable parameter? Oh right. So could I do something like data bind params equals blah 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 here? No, but there would be no reason to, as far as I'm aware, because you can just use the params attribute. However, if you don't want to use custom elements, you can use a syntax like this: data bind equals component. You have to spell it. What's it called? Program. You know what I'm talking about. And if I want to pass params in there, I would do like params equals. Okay, my typing doesn't work. You know what I'm doing. Okay. So yeah, there's two syntaxes for using components are as a binding or as a custom element, and it's up to you which of those two you prefer. You can mix and match them. Any other questions? Yeah.
How does Knockout work with routing to add links which run through refreshing the page?
Yes. Okay, so client-side routing is not a feature that is native to Knockout. It has no knowledge of, opinion of, or interest in client-side routing because it's a library that deals with those things. So you can combine Knockout with any sort of client-side routing library. There are loads available, things like Sammy and Barbecue and blah, blah, blah. The one that I've put into this Yeoman generator is called, it's just one blank, it's called something, let me just show you the code that does routing. It's called Crossroads, okay? So that's just a standalone routing library, and the full set of routing code in this entire application is this 38-line thing. So there's no magic library behind this apart from Crossroads, and Knockout doesn't know we're doing this at all. So all I've got is this trivial little root table here, and a router instance which goes up, iterates over that root table, configures Crossroads to react to that, and whenever Crossroads gives us a callback, it's going to modify this observable value to and then all the different parts of the application. So that's all the secret. And you can swap that out for different clients and routing library if you like. Yes?
Did you say this component functionality is an upcoming version of Knockout?
Yeah, so components comes in Knockout 3.2, which is in beta as of now, and when it's feature complete. So the only reason we haven't shipped it as a production thing yet is that we haven't finished writing all the docs. I've been doing that this week, and how long does it take me to write docs? When are other people going to write docs? I don't know, but within a few weeks, I hope. So that's all that's left to do. You can use it now, it's fully production. And you can get it off Bower now. Anything else? No? Yes.
I just wonder about the component like HTML.
Yeah.
Is params the only attribute that you can do, or can you write your own attributes that get passed through to the component?
Right, so a previous version of this, when we were first prototyping it, the syntax we looked at was like this, because we thought that's a bit more natural. And I think it is a bit more natural. But there are all kinds of bad stuff that happens when you do this. Like, for example, is that a string or is it a Boolean? Who knows? If you would probably want to say, well, it has to be a Boolean because it's super annoying if we're going to pass that as a string. So what if I wanted to pass it as a string? What am I going to write this? That's pretty hideous, right? So we didn't want to do that. We could say also, okay, let's say it's a string by default unless you do something like this. Now we're getting totally weird because now we don't know whether to use these braces or not. So we went through a bunch of different iterations with different designs, and what we settled on was they're all confusing. apart from the one that we ended up with. So we don't do it like this, we do it with the params. However, let's say you did want to have a custom attribute and you wanted to react to it in some way. When your component gets instantiated, if you want to, you can receive a reference to the actual DOM element that's going to get bound to it. So you can just look at that DOM element and see the attributes that are on it if you want to. So you can set up things like a custom binding loader, or a custom binding factory, sorry, a custom component factory, or a custom component loader, which sets